The difference between building and losing has a lot to do with calorie balance. I think that's the easiest way. That's the first deciding limiting factor. So dictating whether you're changing in one direction or other is totally steered by deficit or surplus. And a surplus isn't necessarily bad. Like having too many calories compared to how many you're expending is not necessarily a bad thing, because they're actually either stored as potential energy, so that backup battery, that energy that you might need at a later time or date, or the energy is used to bond and build your muscles. So anytime you build something, you're actually storing energy. That's the way it's bonded. Like energy goes into the bond to keep it there, and then when you tear it down, you sort of use it for fuel. You're expending that energy or releasing that energy for your body to use. That's sort of a simple physiology lesson for you guys today. But the whole point is that whether you're moving in one direction or the other is really defined by your deficit or surplus at the base level. Because in a deficit, it's actually hard to gain anything. It's hard to gain muscle. You might gain a little bit. There's a minimal increase, but for the most part, you're either maintaining or slightly losing. And what sort of magnitude that happens for you is a lot to do with trial and error. You're gonna have to figure that out as you go along. There's a sort of a ballpark I could put you in, but then you start to play with the trial and error with the calories and see where it takes you. So really, if you're trying to gain muscle, the ideal scenario is technically to be in a surplus. You will gain a little bit of fat, but you'll also gain a lot of muscle, because the energy is there for you to pack and then turn into muscle. And it's very hard to do both at the same time. Some people try to argue that what you can do is called recomposition. Basically losing fat and gaining muscle at the same time. It is possible, but whether you can gain muscle the fastest in a surplus, and you can lose fat fastest in a deficit. So taking more calories in than you expend, you're building. Taking in less calories than you expend, you're sort of losing. Now, you do things in that deficit to try to keep as much muscle as possible. That's why protein becomes such an important factor when you're in a calorie deficit. So you're losing fat and preferentially trying not to lose muscle at the same time. That being said, whether you're gaining or losing, it's impossible to decide where you lose on your body. So spot reduction, as it's called, is not possible. It's impossible. Because your body really decides that by genetics, hormones, and a number of other sort of things that are out of your control for the most part. So technically, you usually lose in the reverse order you gain. So let's say you start gaining gaining fat on your stomach and your legs, and then your arms and your face. You lose that in reverse. You lose it in your face, then your arms, then your legs, and then your stomach. For a lot of people, that's the most frustrating thing to hear, because that's the thing they want to get rid of, and it's one of the last things to go. Now, not always. There is some hormonal influences. There are some genetic influences. That's where the body types come into play. That's where some of the hormonal profiles come into play. And there's some people that would argue that they can adjust your hormones. It may or may not be possible. I don't think the science is completely decided on that. But that being said, the science is decided on being in a calorie deficit. It is decided on getting enough protein to maintain muscle. It is decided doing strength training to maintain and to build muscle, to build a bigger engine. It is decided on some additional cardio can help to speed up the process. So again, whether you're gaining or losing is dictated by being in a calorie deficit or calorie surplus. And then when you're in a surplus, you're going to build the most, whether it's fat or whether it's muscle. You'll build the most, the fastest, and you'll lose the most in a deficit. But the one thing you want to avoid when you're in a deficit, you don't want to lose muscle. That's where you lose that tone. You don't end up being toned, as most people call it, unless you're maintaining muscle when you're in a deficit. So remember, building or losing is predicated on a calorie surplus or calorie deficit.